Hello and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by Effie Samara. Effie, how are you tonight?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Well, our first story tonight, the Stage 1 debate of the Free Period Products Bill took place in the Scottish Parliament today. The bill, which has been brought forward by Monica Lennon MSP, has gained cross-party support and passed the first stage vote by 112 votes with no votes against and one abstention. Speaking about the bill, Communities Secretary Aileen Campbell said, "Being able to access period products is fundamental to equality and dignity, and Scotland is leading the world in delivering this. Due to our action and investment, over 500,000 people have access to free period products for the first time ever in education and community settings across the country. We will continue our world-leading action promoting wider period dignity through a certification scheme to encourage organisations to provide free products. And we will continue to work towards removing the stigma surrounding periods through the current Talk Periods campaign. In addition, in partnership with Hey Girls, we are already developing a locator app that helps people access free products. We will also introduce regulations placing a duty on local authorities to make period products available in schools, locking in current good practice from the next school year in August. We know that there are areas of concern with the Period Products Bill that the Government and the Local Government and Communities Committee have raised. Therefore, it is crucial that we work together across Parliament to find a way to agree legislation that will meet our collective aims." And Effie, I mean, this has to be good news. This is something that I know my sister and my female friends have talked about literally for decades. It's just a tax on being a woman. And
Absolutely. It's a tax on being a woman, and the problem with that is that it stops you from actioning your civic participation, your being in the world. So obviously if you are able to buy these things without a second thought, that's great, and that ensures that you are there, you are present, and you can do your work. But if you're not able to do that, then that stops you right there. And it is a class argument as well. It is an economic argument, and it translates across the board. It's also a cultural argument. May I add
Sure.
as well on that point, because there are certain cultures. Or certain, it's a generational thing as well. My mum was a little bit, felt a little bit uneasy about this conversation. So by bringing it into a more, if you like, mainstream debate, you're normalizing it. It's absolutely fine to be a woman, and you don't have to be, as you say, you don't have to be penalized and pay extra for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of breaking the stigma, I mean, it is absurd. Women are more than half of the population.
I think is it 52%? Are we?
Something,
is that
something
yeah?
like
That's
that.
something like that.
And yet we have this kind of squeamishness about talking about something that virtually every woman goes through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that I think, especially for having been a teenage boy myself, it's this thing where you don't learn about it because it's kind of icky and you don't want to talk about it, and then you don't until you're in a long-term relationship with a woman and it becomes something that you have to be aware of.
Of course.
We don't talk about it, and that I think is one of the really positive things.
And it impacts on health, both physical health and mental health. There are girls who, as you say, not so much nowadays, but older generations, we didn't know so much about it. So you had girls who wouldn't want to talk about it, didn't know about hygiene, didn't know what to do, and consequently, that impacted on their, general health, their life. But also it's about, as you say, human relationships and knowing what people do and what they're supposed to be doing in the world, and how to express yourself freely as a citizen, and not to feel ashamed because, going back to your words, you're a woman, or this is happening. It's also to do with age. Sometimes, the younger girls, they'll be a bit more conscious of it. So making it available in schools is a huge plus.
Yeah.
Because 12 or 11, some of them get it. So it's a huge big debate. They don't want to participate in sport because they will be very aware of it. You don't know what to do. You feel very self-conscious. it's brilliant news. It's fabulous. Leading the world in that regard.
Yeah, and Monica Lennon herself, we got a quote from her. "This is an amazing victory for everyone who has campaigned for free universal access to period products and who has convinced the Scottish Government to back this groundbreaking bill. Scotland has already taken important steps towards improving access to period products and tackling stigma, but legislation will guarantee rights, ensure that current initiatives continue in future on a universal basis, and will help us achieve period dignity for all." And I mean, this is one of the big positives I think about this as well, is that it's an opposition MSP that's brought this bill forward, and the Scottish Government has then decided to support it.
Well,
given how divided Scottish politics is, I think that's a real positive.
Oh, it's amazing, and obviously the cross-party support that it received, fabulous news, you know.
Anyway, moving on to a rather sadder story. Lord David Steele, and the first part of this is not the sad part. Lord David Steele has quit the Liberal Democrats after the inquiry into child sexual abuse said the political establishment spent decades turning a blind eye to allegations of child sexual abuse. The inquiry cited as an example the evidence of the former Liberal Party leader, who told the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse last year how he failed to pass on allegations against prominent colleague Sir Cyril Smith, even though he believed them to be true because it was past history. In his resignation statement, Steele said, "I have received indications that some in the Liberal Democrat Party wish me suspended and investigated again, despite a previous disciplinary process in Scotland which concluded that no further action was required. I am told that others are threatening to resign if a new investigation is started. I wish to avoid any such turmoil in my party and to prevent further distress to my family. I have therefore thanked my local party secretary for their stalwart support throughout the whole process and have informed the local party that my resignation is with immediate effect." The 173-page review, following hearings over the past 2 years, names several prominent MPs, including Smith and the Conservative Sir Peter Morrison, as being known to be active in their sexual interest in children, but who escaped prosecution. The police paid little regard to the welfare of sexually exploited children, the report says. Political parties showed themselves, even very recently, to be more concerned about political fallout than safeguarding, and in some cases the honours system prioritised reputation and discretion in making awards with little or no regard for victims of nominated persons. There is ample evidence that individual perpetrators of child sexual abuse have been linked to Westminster. The report added, "It is clear that there have been significant failures by Westminster institutions in their responses to allegations of child sexual abuse. This includes failure to recognise it, turning a blind eye to it, actively shielding and protecting child sexual abusers, and covering up allegations." The report also highlights the case of Sir Peter Hayman, a senior diplomat in the 1960s and 70s who was a leading member of the Paedophile Information Exchange. There were long-standing public concerns about whether the decision not to prosecute, either for his involvement in PIE or for sending obscene material through the post, might have been politically motivated, the report says. And this, I mean, in many ways it's not shocking, but at the same time it really should be that for decades, right up to the present day, political parties have chosen to protect their own reputations rather than face up to people serial child sex abuse.
Is it, I always wonder, obviously, is it a question of power? If you have all that power, some people find this a way of imposing and exploiting their power. And obviously the Westminster system is known for granting certain individuals a huge amount of power. And it goes back to, if you have the power, you can use it. And what's more shocking in regards to this particular item, I think, is the fact that the honour system almost promoted and protected that. That
yeah, I mean, the other people that we named there all were knighted.
Absolutely.
And so was Jimmy Savile.
Absolutely. And we know Jimmy, and I do remember him as a child, and he was, in all the stuff, the funny man and all the stuff that he used to. And one might wonder how much was known of this to, by the police or the secret services or the investigating body. I have obviously I don't have access to that information, but it's up to me. It's abhorrent. It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah, there's a quote in the report. Sir Joe Simpson, who was the commissioner of the Met Police at the time, is reported to have said at a Home Office meeting that there were several cottages in Westminster which we don't investigate because they are frequented by celebrities and MPs. The report adds, it's an example of a policy giving special treatment to persons of prominence and of deference towards those in power at Westminster, which is exactly what you were saying.
The question of power.
The police and the Crown Prosecution Service seem to have just said, well, they're powerful, they're important people, and so we don't look into them.
What does that tell us about ourselves? You know, what does that tell us about how we want to create a system of equilibrium? Because power has to be answerable, otherwise it becomes totalitarianism.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
And some people will have power and some people will have political power. That's just how the system works. But I think it does highlight the absolutely shocking nature of these claims, and also the fact that they go back a long way. And we have several prime ministers who have actively sought to almost suppress reports, claims of paedophilic abuse across the decades. It's, you know, one's lost for words, really. I mean, I find it quite difficult to.
Yeah, I mean, there are mentions of Margaret Thatcher in
Yes.
there who had heard
That was a
reports
civil
about,
time, wasn't
about,
it?
about
Savile,
about
yes.
Savile and about another MP. And did nothing. Theresa May recently was accused of covering up reports on certain things. I mean, are really, really shocking. And one of the things that jumped out to me as well was the statement from David Steele.
Yes.
It's that he doesn't want to cause any trouble for the party. He doesn't show any regret. He describes, you know, I was already investigated by the party in Scotland, and they said nothing more needed to happen. It's almost indignant
It
that
is.
he's having to resign now, and that's incredible. I mean, he has known since at least the late 70s, when he was leader of the party, that Cyril Smith had these credible allegations against him, and he lied for many years that he knew anything. Finally owned up to it recently, and now still can't even take any real responsibility for it.
I think that shows you almost like the texture of power and what it does. It's from what I'm seeing is almost what entitlement does to the human personality. It gives you. It almost gives you the ability to hide under a little cocoon and feel that this is your place and that's where you belong. And if anybody tries to question that, then you, as you say, you become very indignant. This is a time for, if anything, you know, it's a time for reflection. But no, none of that. It's just anger now, and let me get out of this because my family will be affected or my party. It's also a very political. It's also a very political thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that all parties, I mean, obviously parties want to protect themselves from scandal, but I think we saw, for example, with the SNP recently, as soon as that story about Derek Mackay, which some people argued was defensible, the boy was 16,
Yes, yeah.
There was nothing explicit in the conversation, but they moved very quickly and said,
yes,
you have
well,
to go.
that's exactly what you want to see, because people are people and we're all human and mistakes will be made, and sometimes people will be of a criminal nature. There's no way you can police that before it's actually happened. You see evidence of it. As you say, it's the speed. What do you do about it, and how long does it take you to act? If it's going to take you 30 years to act, then that says something about you, you know, and the system that you're trying to promote. If you're going to act within a day or two, that can only be a good thing, and that is the only how you can address these matters. You can prevent them, obviously. You know, you can watch people, you can see people's previous behaviour and what they've been up to. But certain things, they just happen when they happen. You've got to deal with it. Just nip it in the bud.
Absolutely. And on a similar note, following Monday's guilty verdict at his trial on sexual assault charges in New York, disgraced Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein now faces separate charges in Los Angeles. The New York jury found Weinstein guilty of third-degree rape for an attack in a New York hotel, and guilty of a criminal sex act for forcing oral sex on a former television production assistant. Weinstein could face 25 years in prison and will have to register as a sex offender. Next, he is due to face a criminal case in LA stemming from investigations by law enforcement in Southern California into 8 allegations. LA prosecutors have filed charges for 2 incidents that allegedly occurred within a 2-day period. Those charges include forcible rape, forcible oral copulation, sexual penetration by use of force, and sexual battery by restraint, carrying a potential 28-year prison sentence. It's not yet clear how LA prosecutors plan to proceed following Monday's verdict in New York. Weinstein could be immediately brought to California after his 11th March sentencing in New York. He could pursue a plea deal in LA after his guilty verdict in Manhattan, or he could end up facing a second trial, said Laurie Levinson, criminal law professor at Loyola Law School. Weinstein and his attorneys have continued to deny allegations of criminal offences and have vowed to appeal the New York verdict. And this is one of the highest profile of all the kind of Me Too cases that have come out in recent years, but a really dramatic one. And again, Harvey Weinstein, a very powerful man in Hollywood, a guy who could make or break women's careers, and he's finally kind of been caught. And again, once one allegation came out, more and more started to come out, and that's, I mean, I guess it's good that those allegations have finally come out. But I saw a story today. I think it was in the Daily Mash or possibly the Onion. It was, Hollywood all cleaned up after only man guilty of this sort of thing convicted, which clearly there is far more.
Oh, you're going to need a lot of bleach to tip of the iceberg. Great news, absolutely brilliant, fantastic news. That ceiling has now been officially broken. It's been smashed. Something has actually happened. And this is a very, very big event. I was involved in a publication, not a publication, it's an anthology commissioned by York University, edited by Judith Rudakoff last year, called Me Too in Performance. So I was honoured and shocked to research this movement and, if you like, the justices and injustices and how we as women perceive the injustices, and obviously you can't generalize. Not all women perceive things in the same way. You can't generalize with men either. Everyone's an individual, and obviously they are very much entitled to their own opinion. But in the Weinstein case is an absolute landmark case. I will say something though, which is I think was very interesting. I was watching yesterday one of the attorneys, the female attorney. I can't quite remember her name.
Donna Rotunno.
That was Donna Rotunno. She was asked about Harvey's immediate reaction to the sentence, and she said Harvey took it like a man. Now that, to me, possibly sums up the entire mindset behind what Harvey does and the permissiveness that surrounds the violence that goes with imposing your power in this particular way, because it's not, sadly, it's not just exclusive to the film world or the film industry or the media or politics. It happens across the board. Yeah. And it's interesting how we view maleness and masculinity. She said, and that was a young woman, very educated, a lawyer, an attorney, and she said Harvey took it like a man. Now, we have to ask ourselves, look in the mirror and say, okay, what's a man, and what is he supposed to think, and how is he supposed to process this information? Is this what a man does? Obviously, the allegations are, and now the convictions are absolutely shocking. There's a litany here of crimes that he has committed, and I imagine this is nowhere near the real number. There's so much more to come, and he's not the only one. Yeah. I mean, that lawyer, towards the end of the trial, she was speaking to the New York Times. She said
she had never been sexually assaulted because I would never put myself in that position.
So that
Which-
tells you that that is the exactly, precisely. Well, she summed it all up in one sentence. So it's almost like victim blaming.
Yeah.
If it happened to you, it's because your skirt was too short. It's because your makeup was wrong. It's because you'd had too much to drink or whatever. We're never, the one in power. In this case, that was Weinstein. We do not examine our own behaviour. He simply just took his entitlement for granted. I own this company. I can make or break, and I'll impose my own rules. And he got away with it for a good 40 years, 50 years. So,
And again, it seems to be one of those things where people were aware of it.
Absolutely.
People knew about it. It was kind of whispered about.
Oh, of course. They're all complicit,
But again, there's a fear of speaking up, because even if, because Hollywood is such a kind of small community, if you speak up, even though people know it's all true,
Absolutely.
You're viewed as a troublemaker.
The thing that's interesting about this is also the psychological, if you like, the psychological positioning of the victims. I've not read the file, and I'll try and access it, because one of the testimonies was about this woman who she believed in a relationship with him for quite a long time, and that was recent. That was only 2012 or 2013, and her text messages were presented as part of the evidence. Now, they contained a lot of encouragement on her part and a lot of praise for Harvey. Now, that's interesting, because it demonstrates that a victim will do anything to ingratiate herself with the perpetrator. And again, going back to power, someone like Weinstein had so much power that even though she was probably aware of the violence and the wrongdoing, she could not find the courage to come forward or to challenge him, because she knew what that would mean in terms of her career and where that would leave her.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, again, this lawyer, Donna Rotunno, made an argument where during cross-examination, she would say, well, you kept talking to him, you stayed in touch.
Precisely, yes.
And it's like, well, in Hollywood, there's only so far you can be
Absolutely.
from these powerful producers. And as you say, very often women who have been raped will try to somehow
Absolutely.
cope with it, will try to kind of make sense of it in their head by remaining close to the person.
Blaming themselves a lot of the time. It was my fault,
Yeah, all that kind of thing. And it's a horrendous issue. Do you have any thoughts on how the court proceedings, because it's so difficult to prosecute rape, because very often it's just one person's word against another.
Testimony is a huge problem there. You don't have witnesses, most cases.
Do you have any thoughts on how that process can be improved?
It's, for anyone who's dabbled in philosophy, there's something called epistemic injustice. Now, I know it sounds like a long Greek word, and it's not, but believe me, it's actually quite user-friendly.
It's quite a short Greek word.
It's not a bad one, actually. Epistemic injustice. Now, this is to do with ways of, epistemology is a big field in philosophy, and it concerns itself with how you know something, how you know something to be true. What we find in cases of, for example, rape and maybe even just crossing into domestic violence and things like that, is the problem is the testimony of the victim and who is perceived to be a victim, and the testimony of the alleged perpetrator. We have to revisit, I think, in terms of the judicial system and the way that evidence is accepted, we have to revisit ways of accepting evidence, but also ways of encouraging victims to come forward without the fear of being then victimized themselves and accuse themselves of ruining someone's life. Or again, how can you completely safeguard against that? I'm afraid in such intimate settings there wouldn't be a guarantee. But again, in law there is no 100% guarantee in anything. No. Judges, and there's been effort in maybe over the last 10 years, they have revisited the issue. We've had some interesting cases, but still I believe that fear of consequence, fear of being disbelieved, fear of what your immediate social background, your immediate social environment are going to think and how they're going to react to that event, has stopped many women from coming forward. So definitely victim protection is one very serious issue. In how we educate the young. A lot of it is to do with education, a lot of it is to do with how verbal violence is sometimes considered a joke, sometimes is, if you like, considered it's lightheartedly and not given enough weight. These things need to be looked at from possibly a young age.
Yeah. I mean, there's. I remember, and God, I feel so guilty about it now. Things like just pinging girls' bra straps as a teenager, and that sort of thing gets ignored. It's just boys being boys.
Absolutely, boys being boys. So at my daughter's school, and she's only 12, mums say that openly. They'll say, boys being boys. And you think, well, really? That was actually quite violent. The fact that someone invaded another person's personal space, their physical space was invaded, be it a little shove or a push or, sort of launching a pencil, something like that. It could be, funny if, both are sort of launch pencils, but if that lands in someone's eye, is that then funny? Yeah. Now that, I know it could be almost cartoonish the way we describe it, but that is, I'm afraid, I think that is where it starts, and it's got to be dealt with at that stage, rather than leave it when someone's 30 years old. It might be a bit too late.
Yeah. I think before you start having boifriends and girlfriends,
absolutely,
before that becomes an issue, you have to learn those things. But yeah, guys, it's up to us. If we're going to stop victim blaming, that means it's our fault. So, I'm
going to just agree, nod.
The way to stop sexual violence is for men to stop being terrible people. Anyway, on a somewhat related note, Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf has responded to official statistics showing police recorded 60,641 incidents of domestic abuse in 2018-19, a 2% rise on the previous year. Levels of domestic abuse recorded by police in Scotland have remained relatively stable since 2011-12, with around 58,000 to 61,000 incidents each year, according to the latest annual bulletin published by Scotland's chief statistician. In 2018-19, 41% of incidents of domestic abuse recorded by the police in Scotland included the recording of at least one crime or offence. Where gender information was recorded, around 4 out of every 5 incidents had a female victim and a male accused. Cabinet Secretary for Justice Humza Yousaf said, "Domestic abuse exacts a terrible toll on victims and often causes much wider harms, such as impacting on children's safety and well-being within the family home. While these figures are for the year before our domestic abuse laws came into force, the passage of that legislation in 2018, alongside Police Scotland's Every 9 Minutes campaign, helped raise awareness of this insidious crime and its many facets and encouraged people to report their experiences. Domestic abuse is neither acceptable nor inevitable. We must work collectively as parents, friends, co-workers and legislators to bring an end to this blight on society, address underlying attitudes that enable it to persist, call out those who dismiss or minimise its impact, and ensure that perpetrators are dealt with robustly and effectively." And Effie, I mean, this is the figures obviously up slightly, but within the same range that they've been at for most of the last 10 years. But still, they're not going down.
No.
So,
no.
What do you make of these numbers?
It's worrying. I'm not going to lie to you. I always, when I hear the words domestic abuse, obviously, as a woman, as a mum, as a man's daughter, who actually taught me my feminism. My dad is responsible for that. I feel very involved in the argument. This could be any woman, this could be anyone's mother, anyone's sister, anyone's daughter, any one of us. It could be that more people are coming forward, which can only be a good thing. It could be that because there's been awareness campaigns, more people are aware. As we know, especially in domestic settings, there will be cases where women will be going through maybe years and decades of this kind of thing, and they are not even aware that they are being subjected to this, or anyone in a domestic setting. So possibly more people coming forward. I'm not sure that I am aware of any particular trend that would highlight or point towards heightened violence at the moment. I don't know that there's been any other statistic other than possibly, or maybe even crime recorded in a slightly different way. I'm not sure. But I think the more, I would completely agree with Humza there, the more we talk about this, and again, it starts with education, but it's also to do with colleagues, it's also to do with the work environment and the justice system. So when a woman approaches the justice, or any domestic victim, there needs to be more credence given to that victim rather than an immediate suspicion. Oh, but how did this happen, and how do you put that in that? How do you put two and two? Yes, sometimes you will obviously in any crime, in any sort of difference between two individuals, you're going to have people who will come forward and possibly lie or try and make up stuff or give their own angle. But this is serious, and it does ruin people's lives, it ruins children's lives, and it needs, again, I feel that it needs to be addressed at a very young age.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, the figures there, it's 4 out of 5 cases are a female victim of a male perpetrator.
Yes.
It's not to say that there isn't abuse in other relationships, that women can't be abusers.
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah,
but
yeah.
And also, you know, we were talking before the show
Yes.
about even platonic relationships,
Yes.
just flatmates.
Yeah, flatmates, yeah.
But
would that be classed? That would still be classed
that would
as
still
domestic,
be classed as
yeah.
domestic abuse,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
But yeah, by and large, it's
Yes.
men attacking women, and more often than not as well, the male, when it's a male perpetrator and a female victim, there's greater degrees of violence,
There
more
is,
likelihood that
just simply by giving them the muscle and the way. But again, going back to what we were saying about Weinstein just a moment ago, it's about how we perceive masculinity as well. A lot of these cases, probably even the bulk of these cases, you know, how does a man react if a man is rejected or if a man is doubted? Is it okay for him to just go and slap whoever's doubting him? And that used to be very much traditionally the case. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's only what did he say? I said, I'm 26 years old. So he was talking about his granddad. Now, that's a man in his late 70s. And there were disagreements between them because he felt that the grandson was not man enough. Yeah. He said, you don't slap your hand on the table. You don't do the things that we used to do to demonstrate masculinity. Now, some of it can be quite romantic, but most of it is not. And again, you know, these things need to be revisited almost exhaustively. You can't have enough. We can't educate each other enough. We have a responsibility towards each other as well on a personal level, as friends, as work colleagues, within universities, within schools. It never ends because people are people. We'll stray. We'll do the wrong thing. You know.
Yeah, and I mean, again, going back to schools, there's that thing of, you know, boys hitting girls.
Yes.
He's hitting you because he likes you.
Because he likes you. Actually, it was interesting. A teacher just mentioned that about a week ago to me. Said, "Oh, you know, don't worry about it because they're doing this now, but you know, in a year or two they'll be having crushes on it." And I was absolutely shocked. I had to stop her. I said, "Can you just wait a minute and think about what you've just said?" I said, "Is it okay to manifest?" You know,
this is how you demonstrate affection.
Is this it? You know, the manifestation of affection through. Does it start with like? Anyway, it was crazy, and she was a young teacher as well, and it was. But as you know, as we said just before the show, it is to do with such embedded attitudes. Some of it is quite difficult to get rid of. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to less emotional issues. Anyway. The EU will demand that the UK maintains a ban on chlorinated chicken as the price for a trade agreement with Brussels, in a move that protects European meat exports and creates an obstacle to a deal with the US, where President Trump has insisted that food standards should favour US producers in any deal. On the recommendation of France, a clause has been inserted into the EU's negotiating mandate to insist that both sides maintain health and product sanitary quality in the food and agriculture sector, according to a copy leaked to The Guardian. The paragraph in a newly entitled section of the document for the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier, called Environment and Health, provides a catch-all insurance for the EU that certain methods of food production, particular pesticides, endocrine disruptors or chlorine washes for poultry, will not be used in the UK. At the weekend, George Eustice, the new UK Environment Secretary, refused to guarantee that the government would not allow the importation of chlorine-washed chicken as part of a trade deal with the US. Eustice's stance has caused concern in the UK, where the National Farmers Union called for other countries to trade with Britain on our terms. The EU also fears that current suppliers of meat to the UK could be undercut by US imports. And this is one of these issues that has been, chlorinated chicken has kind of become symbolic of the future trading relationships that Britain's going to have. But this is going to pose a problem if the European Union insists that their food standards, which are significantly higher than the US, are maintained. Then it's going to make it very difficult for the UK to negotiate with, certainly under Trump, an America that has much lower standards and wants to have the British market opened up.
I think we're witnessing very, very interesting times. Could you imagine, can you remember yourself, say 10 years ago, without any of this intervening events, would you ever contemplate it? Eating bleached chicken. I mean, just think about it. If it was on the menu, I think they're completely right. European phytosanitary protections are the highest in the world, and I cannot think of any country, of any national entity, any body, any institution of sane people who would advocate lowering food and phytosanitary protections.
Yeah.
Why would you seek to do this?
Yeah.
This is something that I still find quite difficult to comprehend. And more so the fact that there are people who actually believe that this is the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, the American food system is horrifying at many
Yes.
levels. There's new deadly bacteria have emerged in the pig
Yes,
pig farms and
of
stuff.
course.
These things are and if we are kind of going to move down that road, then it's going to take masses away. We've talked a lot on the show to keep Scotland the brand.
Right, yes.
We have this big focus in Scotland in the food sector on high quality, super high
Absolutely.
quality has always been the selling point
Absolutely.
of Scottish food and drink. And if we have this American standards opened up to us or put on us, then inevitably that's going to hurt Scottish produce.
Absolutely.
Scottish
It will no longer be Scottish produce.
Yeah.
It will become something else, and we are yet to discover what that will be. But I think this poses an immediate threat on people's well-being, because this is not something that we were born with. This isn't something that we grew up with. They're looking to impose this now. And even people's, in terms, although I'm not a medical doctor, even people's sort of systems and their digestive system, I don't know that they can they're able to cope with something like this.
Yeah.
This is a big thing that they're proposing, and clearly, to abandon half of your trade, because right on your doorstep with the best trading partners in the world, and be seeking to be, I don't know, to sell onions to Alabama. I don't think that it's going to work, but let's pray that it doesn't come to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
scary.
Anyway, speaking of the US, Donald Trump has taken the unusual step of attacking two Supreme Court justices on Twitter and in remarks to the press. In a dissenting opinion last week, Justice Sonia Sotomayor criticised the Trump administration's frequent appeals to the Supreme Court to intervene in lower court decisions, and the court's willingness to side with such requests. On Twitter, responding to a segment on Fox News' The Ingraham Angle, Trump unleashed a tirade against Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has also criticised the president in the past. "This is a terrible thing to say," Trump tweeted, trying to shame someone into voting her way. "She never criticised Justice Ginsburg when she called me a faker. Both should recuse themselves on all Trump or Trump-related matters. While elections have consequences," a reference to his two Supreme Court appointments since winning the White House, "I only ask for fairness, especially when it comes to decisions made by the United States Supreme Court." And as usual on the show, I find myself almost going mad just reading out Donald Trump's tweets. This is
Do you have to do that often, or is it just a treat that
all
happens?
too often, unfortunately, because that's how the news is made. This is Donald Trump attacking two senior members of the Supreme Court, two of the most respected judges in the country, because they have said that he is abusing the court system.
Which he is.
Yeah. He's already put two really quite extreme right-wing judges into the court, which is his right, absolutely. But then this process of pursuing the Supreme Court rather to overrule lower court decisions is a real problem, and it's causing the Supreme Court not to be able to address these other issues.
It's at the moment what's happening in America is almost contagious, and it's incredibly concerning, not least because it signals a much wider, if you like, issue with how we view justice and the independence of justice, and the independence of the judiciary. Now, Britain was known for its. I'm a lawyer by trade. I studied law and then went on to do other things. So I'm very familiar with, if you like, the lack of a written constitution. But however, with the ideas of precedent and how this was implemented through the centuries, and it to an extent, judges enjoyed a lot of respect because they were able to maintain the independence from the executive. Now, if we go in and breach that and violate that, you are simply left with the executive, which is exactly what Trump is seeking to do in America and has done to an extent. And sadly, there are proposals sort of, being floated at the moment that this may be happening in England as well. Yeah. Now, I find that a very bad omen for obviously, for the future of not just constitution, but also human rights and generally, for the future. He does this a lot. He does rule via Twitter a lot, doesn't he? Makes his big judgments, his big pronouncements via Twitter. I'm not 100% sure that he is 100%. There's something not quite right there. Whether he's going to be there for 12 months from now, we are yet to find out. But interfering in this blatant way says something not just about him. We know about him and we know about what he thinks and his beliefs. But it also, what I find quite worrying is the fact that citizens, American citizens, take that quite passively, and
yeah, I think we just have to hope that as the election year progresses, that
there'll be some opposition to that.
Kind of stand up.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because I mean, I try not to kind of over dramatize these things, but with Trump, I genuinely fear that he is trying to establish a dictatorship.
Oh, he's done it.
He's
absolutely.
Openly talking now about abandoning term limits, about staying in office for longer than 8 years. And he knows now that he's never going to be impeached. He's not going to be removed from office.
No, he won't. Yes,
the Senate
exactly.
Is loyal to him.
And he's consolidating his base. He's able to control a lot of the media. And also in America, let's not forget, Americans don't enjoy the type of educations that Europeans enjoy. In Europe, you've got free education. All European countries, or I will say most, just in case there is one or two that I'm not aware of, but up to doctoral level, you can actually go on and do this for free, which is not the case in America. And the result of that is obviously that most Americans are not informed in the way that Europeans are, and that's what he doesn't like. And he wanted to stay that way, and that's why he doesn't like the healthcare, universalizing the healthcare. He likes the idea that people stay asleep. It suits him. They're useful that way, and as you say, it's progressing and it's advancing. And how far he's going to be allowed to go, I mean, the American people are going to tell us next year, or the college. I'm not quite sure that I understand that, but maybe we can have a conversation about this at a different time. Yeah.
We have been talking quite a bit about the American elections.
The American elections.
There is another debate tonight in South Carolina, and then South Carolina votes this weekend.
That's
so
right.
we will have another indication to talk about on Sunday. But anyway, back in Scotland, a record proportion of school leavers were in a positive destination, such as study, work or training, about 3 months after leaving school last year. Figures show that 95% of young people were in a positive destination, with the gap between those from the most and least deprived communities achieving a positive destination the lowest since 2009 and 10. The statistics also show that more than 85% of school leavers achieve at least one pass at level 5 or better. In 2006-07, that proportion was 71%. The proportion with one or more pass at level 6 or better is 60.5%, and in 2006-07, that proportion was 41.6%. The proportion of school leavers achieving vocational awards has increased to 17%, giving them skills they need for entering the workplace. The achievement of these awards has increased for school leavers every year since 2013-14. Deputy First Minister John Swinney said, "For the 9th consecutive year, more young Scots are in study, training or work 3 months after leaving school than ever before. Moreover, the gap between the richest and poorest communities for those moving into a positive destination continues to narrow. This demonstrates that Curriculum for Excellence is delivering one of the ultimate aims of school education, to secure a positive next step in learning, life and work for our young people. Compared with the previous year, there has been a slight fall in attainment for school leavers who achieve one or more national qualifications. In any high-performing system, there will be fluctuation. However, over time, the percentage of school leavers achieving one or more pass at National 5 and higher level has improved substantially." And I mean, those figures since 2006-07, when the SNP first came into power, I mean, that is quite a big jump. Although in recent weeks we have heard some criticisms. What's your feeling on the education system as someone who with a child going through it?
Yes, a child going through it, and also myself, a permanent fixture within Glasgow University. We do have the wider participation scheme, obviously, which is fabulous. This is something that is organised by Glasgow University, and I think one or two other universities within Scotland. And it does have the aim is to reach out and ensure that as many
I actually
people
used to work there.
Well, there you go, fabulous. So
Yeah.
you can tell me a bit more about it. I've been invited to be, but obviously because of the doctoral program, it's not been possible. But it is an amazing system. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think Scotland has the highest number of people educated to a university degree than any other place in Europe.
It was until recently. I've not heard recent
but
statistics.
It is within that very, very high place.
Yeah.
It is, as far as I can tell, I'm absolutely so happy. My daughter started her education in England as a very, very young child, and then very quickly, we moved to Scotland. So she's Scottish educated, and I would never change that for the world. It's been an amazing system. Also the support system that is created within the schools. And it's not just about what I find very enlightening and very important and significant in a young child's life. There isn't an obsession about results and numbers, because if we want to say that we're part of a society which isn't all about growth, and it's also about well-being, and it's also about looking after each other, and it's also about justice, we have to make sure that each child is assessed and supported in the way that they need to be supported, and not as part of some wider sort of statistic that's out there that needs to be serviced. I'm delighted to say this is very, very much the case in Scotland. There is an active support for each individual, obviously within reason.
Yeah.
You cannot, you cannot simply do this with every single child, every single moment of the day. But this is certainly sort of the idea, the overriding aim is to ensure that children are okay. It's not just about producing a result. And this is brilliant. And it's not about just university, it's about achieving what you want to do. Because they're very, very, let's not forget, they're very, very young at that stage. Yeah. And they don't really know at the age of 16 or 17, they're not sure if they want to become doctors or lawyers or milliners or cobblers or whatever it may be, or farmers or whatever it may be. So this is about creating a cradle for society and allowing the young person to see where they want to go and which direction they want to take, but also supporting them through that process.
Yeah, as you say, the widening access organisations.
Yeah, tell us
there's
about
a couple
that.
of them. Focus West, the one that covers Glasgow and west of Scotland, it does a lot of really interesting work and kind of finding the barriers that people have, the reasons why people don't feel they can go to university.
Is it mostly economic?
That's a factor, but there's the really surprising thing to me was how many kind of other barriers there were. People who felt like they just didn't know how to fit into that social world. People who didn't, people whose parents worried that they wouldn't have anything to eat. Like how will they cope? Where will they live? All those questions were just such a worry for people who's nobody in their family's ever gone to university.
I found that a lot because I did a bit of lecturing last year and the year before, and it was interesting how many of the undergraduates would come to me and say, "Oh, you know what? I'm the first one in my family to have ever, my parents and my grandparents would talk about this," and it gave me huge insight into, as you say, how do you feel being actually saying that I am the first here. Neither one of my parents are university educated, and I found I almost did this, but I didn't really. I suppose I was just lucky that I didn't sit and think about it too much. I just did it; it just happened. But a lot of people, as you say, will, and there will be some guilt attached to that. Sometimes it's like perhaps I should be doing something a bit more practical rather than this. So there's a lot of that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, there's a lot of those barriers, but as you say, these organisations are doing a lot of really incredible work to open up the options and to encourage kids to believe that whatever they want to do is possible. And that's, as you say, that's the goal of an education system. Anyway, a new strategy to ensure Scotland's nature is protected and restored with flourishing biodiversity has been published. By 2045, the strategy will help to transform Scotland and secure the well-being of the environment and biodiversity by restoring nature and ending Scotland's contribution to climate change. This will mean that Scotland plays a full role in tackling the global climate emergency and limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, uses and reuses resources more wisely, bringing an end to the throwaway culture, promotes a sustainable economy that conserves and grows our natural assets, supports a healthy environment that delivers a fairer, more inclusive society. To ensure environmental standards are maintained once the EU transition period ends, an independent public body to oversee compliance with environmental law will be established. Environment Secretary Rosanna Cunningham said, "Scotland's natural environment is our greatest national asset and it is fundamental to our future, our health, our quality of life and our economy. A healthy and diverse environment is essential to the well-being of our economy and people. We are clear that remaining in the EU is the best way to nurture our environment, and we profoundly regret that Scotland is being taken out of the EU against our will. However, as we move outside the EU frameworks that have guided our approach for half a century, it is vital that Scotland demonstrates a coherent, integrated approach to the environment that is governed effectively. That is why we will embed the EU environmental principles into law so they can continue to guide new policy and legislation in future. This strategy will also do more though. It will be a living and evolving approach able to adapt to new evidence as it emerges and refocus work to take advantage of new opportunities or address new challenges." And again, this, as we move out of the EU, clearly our environmental law becomes something that we have to take more personal responsibility for. What's your feeling about this new announcement?
I'm just concerned that it's without the safeguards, but also without the funding, because let us not forget the significant, you need money to do this. You need money to protect the environment. It's a big job. It's not simple. Without European support, how this is actually going to be possible in actual fact, I will totally agree with the Minister there, without the EU framework, because this is also an oversight. It's also about making sure that it doesn't happen, and if it does happen, there is a balancing mechanism and there's a judicial mechanism in place. Scotland has the best of intentions. Let's see what happens. It's a fantastic initiative. Let's just hope that Brexit doesn't. I know it's like saying, what are you talking about even at this moment? But I know it's already happened. But it's almost a tragedy just thinking about that one item, just in terms of the environment. It's a big thing.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on, and on coronavirus, the 4 UK chief medical officers have agreed to update health advice for travellers returning from certain countries. Anyone who has arrived in the UK from these areas since the 19th of February is advised to stay indoors and avoid contact with other people, even if they do not have symptoms, and phone their GP or NHS 24 on 111 out of hours. So this is people coming back from Iran, from specific lockdown areas in northern Italy as designated by the Italian government, special care zones in South Korea as designated by the government there, and the Hubei province in China. For South Korea, anyone who visited the 2 cities at the centre of the outbreak, Daegu and Cheongdo, are advised to self-isolate for 14 days even if they do not have symptoms. And then there's other advice there that you can get on the Chief Medical Officer on the ScotGov website. But again, this is just some advice that we're passing on to you. I don't think we need to talk in great detail about this. So we will just go to our last story of the evening, and this shows statistics showing a drop in the use of short prison sentences of 12 months or less in the second half of 2019 have been welcomed by Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf. The proportion of all court disposals which are prison sentences of 12 months or less fell from 12.8% in April to 9.5% in November, according to the first data published since the statutory presumption against short sentences was extended. While only a small number of offences that would be subject to the extended presumption have been disposed by the courts in the period covered by the publication, future publications will provide more detailed analysis. And Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf said, although very early days, we are beginning to see a modest reduction in our prison population. This data suggests our penal reforms are having a positive impact, reducing the number of short custodial sentences and encouraging the use of more effective community disposals, although it is too early to directly attribute changes in sentencing to the extended presumption. Custody remains the right place for those who commit the most serious crimes and who clearly pose a risk of harm to the public, and I want to ensure Scotland's hard-working prison workers have the capacity to focus on work to rehabilitate these individuals. That requires fewer people to be caught in the revolving door of short-term prison sentences which benefit no one. And again, this is something that we've had evidence on for a long time, that short prison sentences can often do more harm than good. So it's interesting to see that even before we can be certain that this new presumption is taking effect, that we are still seeing judges using less short sentences.
Is it? I'm not obviously in the penal justice system, so I couldn't offer insider information. But I'm guessing here we would be talking about mostly sort of drugs, small drugs offences, and to do with maybe
I think anything with
shoplifting,
a short sentence,
yes, things like that. And I can only welcome these figures. I think it's a very good sign. As he said, community inflected mechanisms are always better. Inclusion is always better than simply just putting someone away in a prison, locking them up.
Yeah, and very often in these cases, you're putting somebody back. You're keeping somebody in the community, meaning they don't lose their home,
Absolutely.
They don't need to lose their job, and they can be.
They don't become more
don't meet other criminals.
They don't meet other criminals to perfect. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Anyway, that is all we've got time for tonight. I would like to thank Effie for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you in. And thank you for joining us as well. It's always important that we have an audience for these shows. It wouldn't be much point in doing them otherwise. If you're able to support us, if you want to support us, then we would really appreciate it if you want to go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month can make a huge difference to the quantity, quality and type of programmes that we want to offer here on Broadcasting Scotland. In an ideal world, we would be a full-service broadcaster, broadcasting all day, every day. We can't do that yet because we don't have the money or the people here, but that is where we're aiming, and we can only do it with your support. If you're not able to support us financially, please don't feel bad about it. We know there's a lot of people in that position, but if you are able to tell people about us, you are able to talk about us on social media, tell your friends about us, let them know what Broadcasting Scotland is, when the shows are on, what you enjoy about them, and just let them know where we are. Getting publicity is one of the hardest things to do, and we don't really have a marketing budget. So whatever you can do to help us there is always welcome. And as well, if you are interested in volunteering, if you want to actually get involved here, there's always work to be done. Whether that's as a journalist, kind of collating and writing up these stories each night for Scotland at 7, whether it's working behind the camera, in sound, in vision, whatever it is you want to do. Or whether you want to appear on camera, there's always going to be a need for people to come and take over here when people like Gordon and myself aren't available. So if you're able to do that, and if you want to get involved, then please do get in touch. Whether you've got skills already or whether you just want to learn, we can facilitate both, and we're absolutely enthusiastic about getting more people involved in independent broadcasting in Scotland. We are going to need better media in Scotland. That's why Broadcasting Scotland was created, and that's what we want to achieve. So if you're able to help in any way, please do. But that is all we've got time for. We'll be back again tomorrow night at the same time. But until then, thank you once again to Effie for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And until tomorrow, have a great time.